Okay, this is the November 4th, 2020 meeting of the TDLR Behavior Analyst Advisory Board. It is 10:06 a.m. calling the meeting to order. We will now have the roll call and certification of quorum.
Laurie Snyder,
Here.
Dr. Joyce Mock, Dr. Mock, can you unmute yourself, please?
Here.
Carol Stone,
Here.
Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski, Ellen Cato Rhodes, and she is here, but she's having issues.
Okay.
Amanda Nichols
I'm here.
and Dr. Gordon Borland.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Having a quorum, the meeting, the Behavior Analyst Advisory Board can continue. At this point, Chair recognizes Mary Winston, Advisory Board Attorney, to present some training for us, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for virtually joining us. We had an interesting time before the camera started trying to make sure everyone's technology worked, but that's just part of it, and we work right through it. This meeting is being conducted by video conference, and the public is watching via live stream. Anyone who signed up to make public comments will have a chance to do so later in the meeting. It will also be available on TDLR's YouTube channel. This morning, I want to provide some tips to make sure we have a successful meeting. Please keep your microphones muted until you'd like to speak. Please put all phones on silent and turn off other sources of noise in your workspace. If at all possible, avoid fidgeting. We've discovered lately that if we have these virtual backgrounds, they sometimes glitch. But one thing that's been constant, if you move around, a part of you will disappear. So that is a little disconcerting. Please state your name before you begin speaking. Raise your hand, state your name. Make sure your hand is visible on the video feed, and the presiding officer will call on you. All voting today will be done by roll call vote, and Ms. Delia Luna will handle that. It just cuts out on confusion. We have folks trying to run the meeting, Dr. Borland. We have our technical folks who are also assisting us, making sure we're on, Mr. Fiscal and Mr. Harris. And we just want to do everything else as simply as possible. That's why we're going just to a raised hand and a roll call vote. If you have any problems connecting during the meeting, try to let the presiding officer know. The staff working in the background will assist with all connectivity issues. Please stay on the camera during the meeting, even if you're not speaking. If you need a recess, let the presiding officer know by raising your hand, saying your name, and I'm sure Dr. Borland will oblige. If you are inadvertently disconnected from the meeting, please rejoin using the same link you used to initially join. At this point, we have had near 30 virtual advisory board meetings. In comparison to the longevity of TDLR and its advisory boards, that's just a small number. But in comparison to this new world that we're currently living in, and we're learning how to operate virtually when we can't be in person, that's quite a few. So that lets us know that sometimes we will have awkward moments. We'll have a few blips. It happens in most meetings. No worries. We handle them in real time. We take a recess if needed. These blips are anticipated. They're okay. We adjust, we move forward, and we take care of all the business we need to act on. Again, thank you all for your participation, and let's have a great meeting. Dr. Borland?
Thank you for the guidance. I'll try to remember to follow the rules. All right, we're at item B on the agenda, approval of minutes for the meeting of January 29, 2020. That was our previous meeting. The members have received the minutes. So at this point, do we have a motion to approve those minutes as written?
Motion to approve. This is Amanda Nichols.
Okay.
Second.
Joyce Mock.
Okay. You got it? Okay, good deal. Any discussion of those minutes regarding possible revisions, corrections, additions? Hearing no comment, I think we move to a vote on the minutes from the January 29, 2020 meeting as provided to the board. Ms. Luna will call the roll.
Yes. Laurie Schneider, Ms. Schneider, can you unmute your mic, please?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I approve.
Dr. Mock, Joyce Mock,
Aye.
Carol Sloan,
Present.
Ellen Cato Rhodes, Amanda Nichols,
I approve.
and Dr. Gordon Borland. Dr. Borland, may you unmute your mic, please?
I approve.
Okay, motion passes.
Thank you. Ms. Luna, motion passes. Those minutes will be, I'll be signing those and providing those to Ms. Luna for the record. Next item on the agenda is item E, our public comment section. The notice was appropriately sent in advance. The Behavior Analyst Advisory Board has received no public comment submitted to the board beforehand. Had we done so, they would be would not be read publicly. We do not have any person who has indicated wishing to speak under the public comment section. So that being the case, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, the briefing from the staff and discussion. First will be representation or report from the licensing division. Laura Hernandez, program manager, will be providing that information. Thank you.
Good morning, board members. I've submitted the statistics for the behavior analysts. Our staff is working from home. We do have one team member in the office daily that are able to process applications. Everything is done online. And new for 2020 and 21 is renewals. Those first licenses that went out in 2018, they renewed in 2020. And you can see that the majority of those are done online. And then what's presented is the whole year for 2020 fiscal year, and then the first quarter for 2021. And I'm available if anybody has any questions.
I have a question. Gordon Borland, sorry, I got to get the protocol down here. I have a question, Ms. Hernandez. Do we have any indication of the number of licensees under behavior analyst statute that are not renewing? I'm just curious.
A percentage. I don't have those percentage of how many did not renew from, say, from the 2018 to now, but I can make that a statistic for the next board meeting to add on to this list.
Yeah, it's that Gordon Borland again. That would be helpful. Or would be informative. Let me put it that way. I know there's been some attrition, of course, because people move out of state, some go into other professions, take leave, whatever. Okay.
Okay, I'll definitely add that for the next as a statistic for the next meeting.
If that's reasonably doable. Okay.
Yeah, we'll look at it.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? If not, thank you, Ms. Hernandez. Appreciate it very much. Next report is from the Customer Service Division. Fun Wind Program Manager will be presenting that information.
Good morning, Advice Board members. My name is Tuan Nguyen. I'm the manager that will be presenting for customer service. So you see in our fiscal increase in we backed up again and it increased a little bit in September. A lot of our customers are contacting about license status and website navigation assistance. But other than that, I'll be happy to answer any questions y'all have for me.
Gordon Borland, again, thank you. Questions, comments, observations? I have a question. I have to say I'm surprised to see the decrease in the apparent relative frequency of email contacts with the concomitant increase in calls. I
can explain that.
Yeah. I'm just curious if you have any suggestion about that, because one of the things that was so good, has been so good, is that so much of the contact has been done by email, which is very efficient. So I'm just wondering, maybe have the nature of the calls changed? Do you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Nguyen?
Yes, so I can tell exactly what happened. So around February, in order to make our process more efficient, so as stated, we are using web forms to route or better route emails in a structured manner, not only to the agency, but also to collect certain information from customers. So when a customer sends in a email with an attachment, emails with attachments actually go directly to Laura's team in licensing. And so we won't, there won't be a bottleneck for that anymore. So usually those would go to customer service, and then we would just get it ready to send to the licensing team. But now that it's done through web forms, and if a customer makes attach an attachment to their email for the web form, then it goes directly to Laura's team, and they're able to process it immediately. So customer service actually is no longer in the middle of that transactions, because most attachments will need to be resolved and reviewed by our licensing team.
Okay. Gordon Borland, again, that's helpful. So to your knowledge, will we be receiving in a subsequent report during this session or meeting information about the numbers of those kind of email initiated contacts then?
Would have to research that a little bit for you, Dr. Borland, because I think there is a way for the licensing team possibly to do that. I'm not too sure. I would have to double check with them.
Part of the reason I ask is because it doesn't give us what we previously were getting, what I thought was a complete indication of the frequency of contact. Now, the customer service report doesn't do that. That's not I'm not being negatively critical. I'm just making an observation. So we don't know the total number of contacts initiated with TDLR about the behavior analyst issues. And I have a second question. Oh, did we lose him? It actually does look like, though, in absolute numbers, that the number of phone calls has increased over the course of the last 6 months. Are people just nervous about their status of their licensure and renewal? Is that maybe, I could imagine there might have been a flurry of people contacting as the initial renewal came up. I heard something you said that made me think that was the case.
Mm-hmm. I'll see what I can do in terms of getting the additional statistics and see how we would go about still getting that data for y'all.
It would. Thank you. That would, from my point of view, it'd be helpful just in terms of knowing the flow of contacts, at least. But yeah. Other questions or comments or observations for Mr. Nguyen? Hearing none? Thank you. Appreciate it. helpful information. Our next report is from the Enforcement Division. Aruza Nizami, the enforcement prosecutor, will be presenting that information for us.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Council members. My name is Arusa Nizami, and I'm the prosecutor with Enforcement Division. I will present the Enforcement Division staff report for you today. First, I have some personnel updates for you. We've had some longtime TDLR folks who have left the agency for well-earned retirements, and we've had some pretty big promotions recently. On February 15th, Debbie Hawkins was promoted to Legal Assistant Supervisor. Debbie has worked for TDLR for about 8 years as a legal assistant in the Enforcement Division. On March 1st, John Medlock was promoted to Chief Prosecutor. John has worked for TDLR for 7 years, previously serving as a prosecutor and senior prosecutor in the Enforcement Division. On May 1st, Trevor Thielen was promoted to Senior Prosecutor. Trevor has worked for TDLR for 9 years as prosecutor in the Enforcement Division. On August 31st, Investigations Manager Greg Dawson retired after 22 years of service with TDLR. Greg oversaw investigations section within the Enforcement Division, which included 42 investigators. This position is currently open with the department, and we hope to conduct interviews really soon. On August 31st, Prosecution Legal Assistant Manager Daryl Kuntz retired after 18 years of service with TDLR. Daryl oversaw the Prosecution Legal Assistant section within the Enforcement Division, which includes 33 legal assistants and administrative assistants. On August 31st, Senior Investigator Esmer Argio retired after 21 years of service with TDLR. Esmer conducted investigations of cases in the building and mechanical, water well, and property tax programs. On October 1st, Jackie Rivera was promoted to Prosecution Legal Assistant Manager to fill the vacancy created by Daryl. Jackie has worked for TDLR for 18 years, previously serving as a legal assistant supervisor in the Enforcement Division. So we just want to give kudos to those that have retired and have been promoted this year so far. Now I want to get into the statistics from the past fiscal year and provide you with a general overview of the enforcement activities. In fiscal year 2020, which started September 1st, 2019, and ended August 31st, 2020, we had about 35 cases open and 10 cases closed without any final orders being issued, nor any penalties assessed. Were closed for being formally resolved. To further expand on that, 9 cases were closed because of insufficient evidence, and 1 was closed with a warning. There are no cases that resulted in disciplinary actions. The average time to close was about 98 to 99 days, and almost 90% of those cases were resolved within 6 months. Lastly, we have the sources of cases open for the fiscal year. As shown in that pie chart to the left, 100% of the cases were opened from consumers. The next page has the top 3 reasons why behavior analysis cases are opened. The first is for code of ethics, unlicensed activity, and lacks honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
This is Gordon Borland, as you might imagine, I do actually have a question or two, but I want to allow others ample opportunity after digesting that very important information. I'll proceed. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Ellen Rhodes. Can you scroll back up a little bit? Because I was sorry, it looked like 30 were still open. Is that correct?
30 are still pending, yes.
Okay. And are those 30 included? So, and those are in the 35.
So
5 have been opened this fiscal year. Is that what I'm reading?
So 35 were open, and of those 35, 10 were closed. So basically what that probably means is that there were probably 5 cases from the previous fiscal year that carried over. So
Okay.
That probably ended up being 30 that are currently open right now.
Okay. And can you scroll down to that next slide, please? Okay, thank you.
Gordon Borland, was there anything else, Ellen? I want to make sure we didn't lose you. Okay, thank you. Glad you're with us. Thank you for raising one of the questions I had. Shows what a brilliant person you must be. Or maybe it's frightening. But I wanted to follow up on that, Ms. Nizami, if I may. So let me see if I'm understanding the math. So it looks to me like, and based on what I understood you to be saying to Ms. Rhodes, that in fiscal year 2020, there have been a total of 40 cases that have been open at some time during that year. So at least 5 of which must have been carryover from the previous year. Is because Ms. Rhodes, I'm not the numbers, the totals aren't coming together.
Right. So basically the way it works is that we look at the cases open from September 1st to August 20th. I'm sorry, August 1st of 2020. So basically any cases opened in that time period are counted. So that's 35 cases. So when a case is open and it goes to investigation or to a prosecutor, it's considered pending. And so in that case, if it hasn't been closed and it's currently still open within that time period, it gets counted as a pending case. So it's a little bit different in that it's 35 cases opened, but then the remaining cases that are still pending are 30 right now. And that could mean that from the previous year, there must have been 5 cases, maybe, that were still pending, on August 31st, 2019. And those 5 cases carried over to fiscal year 2020, and that got counted in the pending cases.
Okay.
Arusha, if I could, this is Chris Rossi, Management Analyst for the Enforcement Division. We put together the stats and the numbers and kind of the people behind the curtains on this one. So when you're looking at cases open, so from September 1st, 2019 through August 31st, 2020, that's what fiscal year 20 is. Okay, so that means what this report says is that 35 cases were open and 10 were closed. Now, y'all been with us longer than just fiscal year 20. So some of these cases would have been, of the 10, could have been opened in the previous fiscal year. So it's not a direct subtraction because we would have had some cases that were opened in the last fiscal year that carried over to those. Does that make a little more sense on that?
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. That was exactly my understanding. So yes, of course it's reasonable. My question remains, however, is that there appear to be cases that were addressed or pending by TDLR Enforcement Division during fiscal year 2020 that were apparently carried over from the previous year. It looks like there must have been 5 of them. As a request, I am requesting that in future reports that we see the totality, not just what we have, which is really important, of course, but also the total number of cases related to behavior analyst licensure or that are in the works. I realize that's not a very technical way to describe it in the Enforcement Division, because I think we had a very similar conversation in a previous meeting. So not necessarily the same, the same two folks from Enforcement. So that's, frankly, I would find that helpful. I think it would have less questions because that situation seemed to set the occasion for Ms. Rhodes to also try to understand how this was possible.
Yes, sir. And that's the pending. We added the cases pending for that exact reason. So there's 30 cases in the works at the moment.
That's my understanding.
Yes.
So my request is for additional piece of information to routinely be provided to the board, that we see the total number of cases, not the information we have, and also the total number of cases that are under review, being processed, handled, whatever, received by the Enforcement Division during the time period in question. clearly we need to see the ones that it's helpful to see the ones that have arrived most recently. Completely agree. But as a member of the profession, I'm interested in knowing kind of what's happening within the profession and perhaps the professional integrity of our profession. So let me relatedly, the 30 pending cases, are any of those from cases that were submitted prior to fiscal year 2020?
I'd have to do a bit more research on that, but I can absolutely get you that information.
Okay, that would be helpful. I mean, I infer from the statistics provided that they very possibly may not be, given the average number of days to resolution. But for those cases that are still pending, they can't be included in that average, correct? Because it's open-ended.
Correct. So yes, these are all closed cases that create that average.
Okay, so it could be, I don't know that there is, and I'm not assuming there is, but it could be that we have some cases pending from fiscal year 2019 for whatever reason. I really can't imagine this, given how efficiently the TDLR works, but it's conceivable that we have a case that has gone on for over a year for a variety of reasons, no fault of TDLR, which when finally factored into the average would maybe bump it up. Just as an observation, it would be help, given our responsibility as board members. I think it would be helpful for us to have some information indicating how that's going in terms of the resolution of cases. What, in other words, it would be, or to put it maybe a little more succinctly, or additionally, some range would be helpful. We've had the cases that are still pending have been with Enforcement Division from 3 days to 90 days or something like that. I don't know, but it would be helpful to know, because as a member of the board, I am concerned, are there some issues that are arising that are proving really difficult to resolve, that we might be able to provide some input to the enforcement staff about, because it may be something idiosyncratic in the way our business our profession operates. So that's
I can what you're saying now. You're weighing the average age of the pending cases and the ages of what they are. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Maybe a range would be nice, because as we all know with statistics, if you get one outlier, it really alters the average a lot.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Nice if there's an outlier. I'm sure you know what I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Other questions or comments from the board?
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Thank you.
I actually had a question.
Please go ahead.
I have two. So you had a couple of
Excuse me. Who are you?
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is Amanda Nichols. Thank you so much, Gordon. This is Amanda Nichols, and I have two questions for you. The first question, I see that a number of those cases are related to a code of ethics. And I was curious, is there a specific code that is more prevalently violated or in question for these cases?
Yeah, so I don't specifically work on the behavioral analysis team, but I know that there might be stats. Chris can probably go further into that, but I know for when violations are opened, we just leave it as the code of ethics, because that is like the category that catches them all. And so I'm not sure if there's further information that breaks it down on which ethics code it is, because for after the case is open, it gets further investigated, and then the prosecutor sees that information, and then they can determine if the violation actually occurred. But at the time of this opening, when they have to select what the reasoning is, code of ethics is usually the thing that gets selected. So just depending on where the case goes, it kind of determines what the violation is. But this is the kind of catch-all when it comes to that, because there's so many codes of ethic violations that could occur.
I know, I realize that. I'm just curious if there's one particular code that everybody's kind of getting caught up on, or maybe 2 or 3 codes, or if it's just a range of issues that people are having, and whether or not we can address those particular issues specifically.
Yeah, I can
And I was
note that
also
down.
curious, how is COVID affecting your ability to address these cases?
Yeah, I think there's we will go further into COVID issues with TDLR because there has been obviously a response to that since it's been happening. But I think further on in our agenda we would get into that. And yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is Gordon Borland. Amanda, thank you for raising that because I just want to second your question. That as the board responsible for some advising related to oversight and regulation of the profession of behavior analyst, I too would like to know something about the code, the specific codes that are being tagged. And I recognize, Ms. Nizami, that often there may be multiple things that are cited or in the complaint. I started to say allegation, but it's actually a complaint. And so it would be, I think, not just interesting, but potentially helpful for the board to see a little more specific breakdown on that, because when 33 out of 35 are ethics issues, that's over 90%. I did some quick math there, but and so it would, as I was saying, I think it would be helpful for us to be able to know, is there some clustering of those? Is it about supervision? Is it about multiple relationships? Is it consent? And if so, then if we had that information, we might then the board could be in a position to perhaps make some recommendations to TDLR and perhaps to lay them out for consideration by professional organizations that these are issues in Texas that the profession needs to look at. I think it could be a very beneficial thing. Again, maybe they're just scattered all across the board, but we don't know that.
Yeah, I can note that down and then.
Thank you. That would be helpful. I know it increases the work. I understand. I know it's so much more difficult right now to do all that because we're all doing exactly what we're doing this morning. Sitting barefoot in front of a computer, trying to look. But any other questions or comments or observations for Ms. Nizami regarding the Enforcement Division? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russi. Appreciate your guys' input and your work, because this is just part of the real core of licensure, is making sure that we protect the public. That's what this is all about. All right, next report is from the Regulatory Program Management. Katie Bryce, Program Specialist, will be providing that report.
Good morning. This is Katie Bryce with Regulatory Program Management, the Medical and Health Profession section. Staff have been working with the Standard of Care Work Group and Office of General Counsel to develop draft rules on telehealth, which will come up later in the agenda. Staff facilitated the licensing work group to review and discuss the Qualified Applied Behavior Analysis Credentialing Board's Qualified Autism Services Practitioner Supervisor Certification Standards and Requirements, which is also another item on the agenda. Staff have been working to implement House Bill 2059, which requires certain healthcare practitioners to complete a Health and Human Services Commission approved human trafficking prevention training course to renew their license. This requirement went into effect on September 1st, 2020. Staff have also been involved in the development of the new Texas licensing system, which is the new software system we will be implementing for licensing across all of our programs. For outreach, RPM staff attended the virtual Texas Association for Behavior Analysis conference and had a virtual booth during the conference, which was held April 23rd through 26th. Are there any questions?
Board members, time to ask? Well, this is Gordon Borland. Sorry. I do have a quick question. Do you have any senses yet about the implications of the new licensing system, which sounds like a really good idea to have everything in a uniform system? But do you have any indication as yet regarding any implications of that for the behavior analyst, licensed behavior analyst and licensed assistant behavior analyst programs in specific?
I believe that some of our larger programs are going to be transferred over to the new software system first. And so by the time that we are able to transfer the behavior analyst licensing program to the new licensing system, it should be very seamless. And hopefully you won't really even notice the difference.
Gordon Borland, thank you. When might that become effective for the behavior analyst program? And again, I realize there may be no way to know yet.
I do not have that information yet. I'm sure we can give you an update on that at either the next advisory board meeting or in between.
Okay.
I'm sure in our newsletter, the Health Monitor will be giving updates on it.
Okay, good. So just as Gordon Borland again, just as an observation, I hope it doesn't deter at all the efficiency with which the system's been working for behavior analysts and licensed assistant behavior analysts.
The goal is for it to definitely improve, not hinder. So
that's great news, because again, I interact with people licensed in other states, and in some of those other states, just initial application processing and renewal is just a nightmare. I keep telling them they need to check with Texas, but so I don't know what the issue is, but if it makes the process, if this change makes the process even more efficient, that will be really welcome news as well. Any other comments or questions?
yes.
Hearing nothing, thank you very much, Ms. Bryce. Appreciate it. Our that information. Our fifth and I think final report by staff is from the executive's office, and Mike Mendes, the deputy executive director, will be providing that.
Remember, this is Mike Mendes, I'm deputy executive director for the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. Thank you for being with us this morning. I want to thank you for your service to the state of Texas, and especially to your industry. I know that you took a lot of time out to make sure you ask some great questions, but take some time out to make sure that your industry is being protected, and for that we do appreciate it. I'm going to be bringing you the executive report, and I can tell you that from the last time we met, which I believe was back in January, we have had a lot of things happen. Of course, I think we mentioned in that meeting that we do have new deputy executive directors. We have Christina Kaiser, who was formerly the director of enforcement, is now a deputy executive director. And she is over the regulatory division, which includes RPM, enforcement, and field inspections. We also have a deputy executive director, David Gonzalez, who's over the licensing division, and that includes customer service, exam and education, and also the licensing division. So my primary responsibilities fall under the administrative services, which is finance, disaster response, and also the IT division. Just kind of give you a little bit of background who we are. Of course, we are there to make Brian Francis, our executive director, look good. And so two of the three of us do that. So I'm still trying to do my best on it. So I've got a lot of information that I want to provide to you. You'll see in our agenda, we've got about 5 items we've got. So I would just hang on because we're going to go through these pretty fast. But I do want to leave it available for questions because we, as I mentioned earlier, we have had a lot of things happen since our last meeting. I want to begin with our COVID response. As you're aware, we have a COVID pandemic taking place, and it has been not foreign to our agency either. We've been impacted by it. Back in about March, we sent a lot of our employees home to work. We're currently running about 85% work from home. We do have some employees that have stayed in the office by the very nature of what they do in their job duties and job responsibilities. But most of us are working from home. And so that impact that we have that Ms. Nichols asked about, it has been a challenge. But what we have found is that we were resilient and managed to be able to continue to do the work that we needed to. So we're still managed to do the licensing. We've managed to issue those. We've managed to take customer calls. The immediate impact that we found when working from home and at the initial outset of the pandemic was that we had to pretty much stop and cease inspections, investigations that would require that we be on site. So those things did cease. We were managed to still do investigations that we were able to do over the phone and still make phone calls. So we were managed to do some investigations. So those things continue to go on. I can tell you that we began we resumed investigations and inspections on June the 10th, and that was on a very limited basis. We've actually increased more so since then. What we're doing is we look at every single county for the rates that are currently there, the positivity rates. If it's a very high positivity rate, then we will again cease to do inspections and investigations in those counties until we know that the positivity rates have begun to start decreasing. When it gets to an acceptable number, at that point in time, we will go back in and start doing those. So just coming to the things that we did, we are currently developing a return back to the office. And we're not saying return to work because we have been working, but it's return back into the office. It'll be on a very limited basis. I can tell you that we're probably looking initially around the 25% mark. We haven't really pegged an exact number because a lot depends on just the nature of the work that needs to be done. We're working at doing that around the 1st of January, beginning the year January 21. But again, what we're doing in these next 2 months, and we're evaluating every single statistics that's coming out, the rates that are coming out, to make sure that we're doing several things. One of them is to ensure that we're keeping our licensees safe and not get into a situation where we could cause or spread any type of COVID at the same time as making sure that our employees are safe. So we'll continue to evaluate that. I can tell you that when you send approximately 500 employees home to work, it is quite a challenge. And especially if we were not structured as such to be able to begin to do that, it became more of a challenge. But I can tell you that our IT department stepped up, did a fantastic job. They worked countless hours, countless calls to ensure that our staff were connected, that they were connected to the downtown and to the North Campus, wherever they were at, and that they could continue to work. So they managed to get everybody up and running by a couple of weeks. And so I tell you, I have to give Simon Skid and his group a shout out because they did a fantastic job from an IT standpoint of getting us all up and running. Some of the things that did occur is that we did waive CE requirements for some individual licenses that expired back in March, April, May, and June that we normally impose. We waived some of those CE requirements. We did waive some late renewal fees also through June the 15th when we first started this process. I can tell you that one of the things that we have now requested from the governor's office is to extend some the expiration dates for about 90 days on some of the licenses that are expiring here recently. Through this all, though, we have continued to work with the governor's office, talk to them kind of on a, if not a daily basis initially, more on a weekly basis now to ensure that we're staying in contact with the governor's office and providing them information that we believe is needed and some waiving of requirements so that our licensee base can continue to function and move. I can move, Dr. Borland, I can move on to the strategic planning update, or I can sit here and wait in case anybody has any questions on COVID.
Gordon Borland, thank you. Any questions about that? I know, Amanda, you had raised a question. I mean, Ms. Nichols had raised a question earlier. I don't know if you had a follow-up for Mr. Mendes related to that.
This is Amanda Nichols. No, you answered it very well. You had mentioned that you had to stop on-site investigations and that you're looking at 25% return to office rate approximately on January
Approximately,
1st.
yes.
Yeah.
Approximately,
So,
yes.
thank you for keeping us apprised of all the changes that are happening. And I also want to applaud the IT department. I'm sure this has not been an easy thing. So thank you so much for everything that you've done.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's Gordon Borland. Other questions before we move forward? I actually had one. Is there anything in particular regarding the behavior analyst licensure program that was at any particular impact by the COVID situation?
Dr. Morley, it's Mike Mendes with TDLR. Not exactly sure unless there were some CE requirements that would have been required, anything to that effect. I could probably have some of my staff send me some back channel me and I can provide that to you before I get off.
Okay, that would be good because I can imagine some of the extension of licensure dates may have happened for some of us. I personally didn't. Right. I want to second what Ms. Nichols said. I am very pleased how smoothly things, at least from my perspective, seem to have continued running. I did my renewal, which I was just thrilled, frankly, very thrilled to have the opportunity to renew my license. But it went quickly and easily, and they took my money very easily.
That we will do.
Yeah. So any other comments or observations? If not,
well, I appreciate you. I appreciate you recognizing that, Dr. Borland, because it was kind of a duck on a pond. We try to be smooth on top, but I'll tell you, behind the scenes, we were working frantically to make sure that our licensees weren't affected by it.
I can imagine, and thank you on behalf of our profession, really, very much. Second, what Nichols said. So, hearing no other questions or observations, or no one waving their hand, please continue.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to move on to our strategic planning update. As you're aware, every 2 years we have a requirement to provide a strategic plan to the legislature. This year is no different. COVID didn't stop that either, but it did change how we go about doing it. Historically, we would travel to various cities. We kind of take the show on the road, and we would go to various cities throughout the state of Texas. We would hold meetings and give the opportunity for our license base to answer some questions, tell us what their thoughts are, tell us how they would improve the industry, how they improve the licenses. You know, the famous question, if you were king or queen for the day, what would you change? So this COVID situation, well, actually, let me tell you this. We had all of our cities planned. We were already in the process of booking hotels, making sure that we travel. We had divided our team up and who was going to be going to which city, and then COVID hit. So we had to revamp, step back, retool how we thought we would need to continue to do this. So we are doing pretty much now. Our first test to the virtual world was through the strategic planning. So we held a strategic planning virtually. We had a lot of success. We had a lot of great input from our licensees that gave us the same answers to what we were looking for. And so through that, we managed to be able to develop our strat plan. Ironically enough, the last time that we did our strat plan was after the effect of Hurricane Harvey. And then in this particular instance, when we did our strat plan, it was under the guise of the pandemic that we're under. So we went from a natural disaster to a pandemic. Of course, as you can imagine, that impacts how our strat plan begins to start developing because we foresee that this will also have an impact in the legislative session for bills being filed and the ability for our licensees to continue to work. So, but out of that, we did have some goals that came out of it. And just so you know, I want to kind of go through that. We basically had about 5 goals. One was to fully implement and to administer recommendations resulting from the sunset review, which I'll talk about here shortly. But there were some management actions that were given to us, and we want to make sure we fully implement and administer those. We want to remove redundancies and eliminate bottlenecks. So we want to make sure that we're improving our efficiencies for the rules that we have to do and decrease regulatory burdens. And that's now going to be a part of our strat plan and our agency go to do that. We want to focus on protecting the health and safety to combat human trafficking and to prevent consumer harm. As you're aware, one of the things that came out of the last legislative session is that we were appropriated some funds and also FTEs to develop an anti-human trafficking unit, which we now have, which is kind of headed up by our very own Mary Winston. And so she heads up our human trafficking division, the anti-human trafficking division, and they're doing a fantastic job. They just got geared up. We're ready to get out and get started, and then COVID hit. But they still managed to do a lot of information, a lot of work. They made a lot of great contacts. And so through that, we're able to assist and help in combating human trafficking in the state of Texas. Number 4, we want to position TDLR for the next natural disaster or pandemic or crisis. So again, in the last 2 sessions that have taken place with Hurricane Harvey and now this pandemic, it begins to cause us to shift on how we need to do things, how we need to make sure that our license base continues to work. So we want to make sure that we have everything in place as far as our rules, regulations that would allow us to be able to kick in certain aspects of the licenses to make sure that Texas continues to function, continues to work. And so we want to make sure that we get that and position ourselves for that. And then, of course, the last thing is continue to streamline and improve the administration of programs that are transferred to us. Out of the last session, we had a couple of programs that were transferred to us. One of those was the motor fuels program, which is basically all the gas pumps that you see out in the state of Texas. We now regulate those and license those. So that is now a part of our also motorcycle ATV safety education is part of what we do now also. So as we have programs transferred to us, as you know, court behavior analyst, we want to make sure that we improve that transfer. We want to make sure that there's value in the transfer of those programs to TDLR so that 2 things happen. One of them is we become efficient. And the second thing is that we can get out of the way to allow our licensees to work. So those are a couple of things that came out of our strat plan. Any questions on the strat plan?
Gordon Borland, I appreciate that update. That's very helpful. But other questions, comments, or observations from the board? Hearing none, please forge ahead.
Okay. Let me move on. I'll get into kind of my area here, the LAR update. The legislative appropriations request has submitted to the LBB and to the governor's office. As you know, again, one of the requirements that we have is that we have to submit our appropriations request to the legislative budget board and to the governor's office for the next legislative session so we can be funded for the next biennium. We go right now we are funded through fiscal year 21, which will end August 31 of 2021. But the next biennium will begin on September 1. So that biennium, the appropriations that we have submitted there is what we have. We had been anxiously waiting for the instructions to come out to the LAR, and I'm going to call the legislative appropriation request an LAR. In the process of waiting for that LAR, it kept getting further and further. And as you know, COVID has, again, I keep talking about COVID, but it impacted the finances for the state of Texas through sales tax, motor fuel tax, oil tax, just everything was being impacted by it. So as in July, came out with this forecast and did say that there would be a decrease. I believe that they were expecting about a $4.3 billion surplus, and it shifted down to about a $3.6 billion deficit. So in the process of doing that, they requested some state agencies to take a 5% budget reduction. So we were not immune from that. We also had to submit a 5% budget reduction, which we did. And so when the LAR instructions came out, in that LAR instructions, they asked us to also have a 5% budget reduction submitted for the next biennium, which we did. So the biennium that you see in fiscal year 22-23 will include a 5% budget reduction of what we normally ask. Now, along with that, we did have some exceptional items, and some of those exceptional items was to reinstate some FTEs that we cut, one being in anti-trafficking, but to be able to put some of those back in order to be able to continue to do our work so that the industries that we regulate are not affected by it. So that LAR process is a big part of who we are, and as we continue to function and to fund our agency. So that has now been submitted also. Happy to answer any questions on that. If not, I can move to the sunset.
Other questions or input? Amanda, Ms. Nichols, please.
Yes, this is Miss Amanda Nichols. I did have a request actually. Is it possible to receive this as kind of in a report form so that we can look it over and kind of get updates on it as you move along?
From what I'm giving you now?
Yes.
Oh, yes, I'm sure we can. I've just always kind of been winging it. So I'll see what I can
No,
get to
you're
you.
doing great. It's just, it's easier for me to be able to look at it as you guys are
Sure.
progressing through the year. So
Okay,
thank
sure.
you so
We'll see
much.
what we can get to you. Not a problem.
Thank you.
You bet.
Gordon Borland, other pardon me, questions or observations from the board? Don't be shy. Well, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Yep. One of the things that's running about the recent budget request, you said there was had to include a 5% reduction. Now, so my question is 5% reduction compared to what? Is it 5% reduction compared to the current biennium budget, or is it as it was originally approved, or is it a 5% reduction after the agency has already taken a 5% reduction, which would make it more than make it about a 7.5% reduction overall?
That's a great question, Dr. Borland. What we ended up doing is the legislative appropriation of the request, and it was approved by the legislature that we're currently in. We had to take a 5% budget reduction of that. So essentially, what we ended up doing was taking that and carrying it over to the next biennium, which meant that we simply had to take that and carry it. So that same amount that we were appropriated in this current biennium just simply crossed over. And so it was just a consistent 5%.
Gordon Borland, thank you. That's actually reassuring, because otherwise you kind of get into like something analogous to compound interest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it was just 5% of our current budget.
Okay.
Our current budget we have back. That's correct.
Thank you for that enlightenment. Other questions about this item before we move forward? Seeing none, please continue, sir.
All right, I'm going to move into our Sunset Commission report. Again, a part of the legislative process is that there are certain agencies that are identified that are extended every 12 years. And the last time that TDLR had a sunset report done was about 16 years ago. So it was time for us to go through our sunset process. I can tell you that we welcome the sunset process. It was the ability for us to see ourselves from a different set of eyes, which was really good for us. So we welcomed it. We found it very relevant, and we know that it's going to add a lot of value to our agency. I can tell you, just let me get to the last chapter and let you know what happens in the story. The Sunset Commission staff has recommended that we be extended for another 12 years. So that report was published on June the 4th this year. So that is a recommendation by Sunset staff. Let me kind of now take you back to chapter 1. The Sunset staff came in right after the legislative session began and stayed with us for about just a little over a year. Now, I can tell you this, they attended numerous staff meetings. They attended commission meetings. I'm not sure if they were in the behavioral analyst meeting that you had in January. They may have been there also. But they also went out and did inspections. They talked to a lot of employees, and they got really down into the weeds for TDLR, which helped out us to be able to see certain things, because in that they identified certain things that they brought to our attention and brought up to the surface. So there have been items that have been identified, and there have been recommendations by Sunset staff, and some of those have been deregulation of certain licenses. I can tell you that in the behavioral analyst, there was really nothing that impacted the behavioral analyst industry other than simply maybe some of the metrics that we use internally about how we calculate numbers. And so those type of things may have affected, would impact us overall, but I can't say that there's anything that really is going to be affecting the behavior analyst industry. There were some several management actions that were brought forth by the Sunset staff. And as I mentioned earlier, Deputy Executive Christina Kaiser, she's been asked to lead the management team to implement those management actions. Again, it goes back to our strat plan. We want to make sure that we're implementing those as part of our agency goal. And Deputy Executive Director Kaiser has been tasked with that. She has a team that started meeting immediately in June once the report was released to begin to start that implementation process. I'm happy to report that we have implemented some of those recommendations already. And then we have a plan in place to begin to start implementing the others and begin to start the process of trying to get that where we need to be. I can tell you this also. Again, we're in a kind of an unusual situation here. Normally, we would have already had our sunset meeting, a sunset hearing, public hearing, and a recommendation to be made. COVID has changed how we do things. Sunset has had the very first meeting that they had was approximately a month and a half ago. TDLR was not on that agenda. And so they took a lot of agencies, but not our agency. There is currently a meeting scheduled for November the 12th. And again, once again, TDLR is not on that agenda, but we do expect to have a hearing before the Sunset Commission prior to the legislative session beginning. Real quickly, just so you know, the Sunset Commission consists of 5 senators, 5 representatives of the House, and 2 public members are sit on that Sunset Commission. Once we actually have our Sunset hearing, it'll be a public hearing where they will take testimony by Executive Director Brian Francis and possibly by our Chairman, Rick Figueroa. And then at that point in time, what will happen is that they will open it up for public hearing for the public to be able to speak. I can tell you that we have some deregulation pieces to the Sunset report that's been recommended by the Sunset Commission staff that we believe will have a few comments. If you go out to the Sunset website, which is sunset.texas.gov, you will be able to find the agencies that are currently under review, and you will find our agency. You have the opportunity to make comments there, and I highly encourage any licensees, anybody in the public, to make comments on our agency. Again, we find this as a very refreshing, a very encouraging portion of what we do in order to improve ourselves. But I think that we have probably one of the highest number of comments that are being put out on the website. There's a lot of talk concerning just simply the licenses that are being recommended for deregulation. Once that hearing takes place in the Sunset Commission, they will come together later on to have a decision on that report. And then in the legislative session, a bill will be filed. It has to go through, of course, the regular process, committee hearings on the House and the Senate, and still be passed by each side and signed by the governor. So there's still a lot of steps still in this process remaining. So I just want to make everyone aware of that there's still a lot of ways in order for people to be able to participate in the Sunset Commission and the Sunset Report. And so we do highly encourage everyone to be able to go out and do that. So you can find that Sunset Report, as I mentioned, on their website. I was going to mention to you also our strat planning report and the LAR report. All of that is on our website too. You can go to our main page at tdlr.texas.gov and you will find those reports there also. So my apologies. I was going to mention that to you and completely forgot. Any questions on the Sunset?
This is Gordon Borland. Yes, Ms. Nichols.
Hi, this is Amanda Nichols. I wanted to say thank you for letting me know about the link. I will definitely check that out.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, my apologies. I should have mentioned that to you earlier. I'm sorry about that, Ms. Nichols.
Not a problem, not a problem.
Thank you. Other questions or comments, observations related to this bit of the information? Brian really handed off a really large bag to you today, Mr. Ares Mendes. No wonder he's...
Yeah, they did. Yeah. And I have to sit here and take it with a smile because that's what he expects of me.
Yeah.
I can tell you, normally we would have another deputy executive director on here. We would kind of tag team it, going back and forth. So I apologize. I may be a little long-winded, and I know that you guys have other business to do. So I do want to bring an answer to your question, Dr. Borland. In the event that there were any behavior analysts that had any late fees between March 13th and June 13th, then those fees were waived if they had any late fees. And also, I'm sorry?
I was just identifying myself, but please continue. I didn't interrupt.
So, yeah, so they paid no late fees during that time. So that's how the impact would have taken place to your industry.
Gordon Borland, thank you. I thought that was the case. I think I remembered seeing something in the communication from TDLR, which I really appreciate the flow of info we get. That's very helpful. Yeah.
And I have to thank our strategic communications, because they're sitting here listening to this meeting, and the moment I made that comment, I got flooded with information. So that's good to know that they're actually listening to me and trying to help me out, back me up a bit.
Gordon
Any
Borland,
questions?
that was a nice probe of their attending behavior. That was very astute of you. Let's say, maybe you're one office at heart. But could you repeat again the website for the Sunset Commission?
Sure. It's sunset.texas.gov.
Okay, sunset.texas.gov. And just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, there is currently opportunity for public input already for comment. And then there will be opportunity again at the public hearing whenever that occurs. But the public hearing will occur before the legislative session convenes again, correct?
We believe that it will occur prior to the legislative session gaveling in.
Okay.
So once you go to that website, Dr. Borland, on the right-hand side, it will say agencies now under review. So when you click on that link, you will find licensing and regulation. And so it's when you click on that, then it will give you all information that's there and also say public comment.
Okay. Thank you.
I will also let you know that we are under what they call a limited scope. So the only sunset programs that they were looking at were those prior to 2016. So if we had any licensed industry prior to 2016, that was what was being under the sunset review. But anything after 2016, we have the fortune of being able to go through this process again after the legislative session for all programs after 2016. So we'll go through this again for another 2 years after session.
So Gordon Borland, so I infer from what you're saying then that this license did go into effect before 2016, that it will be part of the scope in 2 years. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think Ms. Nichols, were you presenting SDs for recognition, being recognized? No. Oh, okay. Other questions are up. All right. And I think you are now in the position of putting the ball over the goal line, Mr. Aaron Mendes, communication outreach statistics.
We go ahead and believe Delia is pulling that up. You see before you that for the last 6 months, we always like to provide this information, kind of gives you some insight as to what your industry is doing and what they're looking at. But for the last 6 months, beginning from May 1st to October 31st, there have been over 19,000 views of the Behavior Analyst website for an average of 105 per day. As you can see, 64% of those were from a desktop computer, 35% from a smartphone, and 1% from a tablet. I feel like when I go to the top reasons for visiting the site, number one is people want to see how to apply for a behavior analyst license. Number two, of course, is frequently asked questions. 3 is how do you renew your behavior analyst license or assistant license. Number 4 is behavior analyst forums. And then number 5, people want to go out and read the rules to see about the industry in itself. So any questions on that?
This Gordon Borland, any questions or comments from the board? If not, we appreciate the presentation of data.
Dr. Borland, board members, thank you very much. Again, I know I took up a lot of time, but since our last meeting that we had in January, we have just had a slew of things going on. We hope that next time we meet, we won't have this information to give you. My apologies. Thank you.
Gordon Borland, thank you very much for this very informative information. And there was a lot to cover. And Ms. Muir.
Dr. Borland, sorry, I just wanted to clarify one thing. The behavior analyst program was included in the last sunset review. So y'all will not be included in the next round in 2 years. It was for programs that transferred to TDLR, but this was a new regulation, so it was included.
Oh, that's great news.
Yeah, yeah. Gordon Borland, again, thank you. So the 2016 cutoff was for transferred programs.
Yes.
So any new programs, regardless of origin, date of origin, were included, and we were. Okay.
Correct.
Well, I'm very pleased that we apparently didn't embarrass TDLR. Thank you for that update, Ms. Moore. Appreciate it. Thank you. This point, we're ready to move on to item G on the agenda. Work group reports. We have 2 of those. The first is from the Standard of Care work group. That group of folks looked primarily at some possible draft rules for the practice of telehealth by behavior analyst license holders. And I believe Ms. Snyder is prepared to present that report.
Hi, were y'all going to put that on the screen? I thought, do I need to get it out of my email? Gordon, or
Yeah,
can y'all hear?
I don't think you could read it if I held it in front of the camera. So
I thought, now I understand. I thought it was going to be put on online. Hold on just a moment. Let me pull it up.
if you can grab it quickly and easily, that's fine. If not, someone else that has it available could read it on your behalf.
Yes, I actually had it here just a minute ago.
Okay.
The Behavior Analyst Advisory Board Licensing Work Group Report, September 29th, 2020. The Behavior Analyst Advisory Board Licensing Work Group met on September 29th, 2020 to discuss and review the Qualified Autism Services Provider Supervisor, that's a QASP -S.
Excuse me, Ms. Snyder, if I may interrupt. I believe that's the next report.
Okay. That is the only one that I have right here, I believe.
You were doing an excellent job of reading it, though. I want to be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is the only one that I have in my emails of recent. Let's see.
Okay, that's fine. Maybe another member of the work group has that available to read. I don't know if Dr. Mock has that readily at hand. Read it. If not, I do have it, so I could proceed if you like. What? I'll just go ahead and read it. And Laurie, I won't sign. Ms. Snyder, I won't sign much. I won't sound like you, so I'm sorry. Okay. So this is the Behavior Analyst Advisory Board Standard of Care Work Group Report. The Behavior Analyst Advisory Board Standard of Care Work Group met on July 20 and September 14, 2020 to discuss, draft, and review telehealth rules for the full advisory board's consideration. The meeting attendees on July 20 included Dr. Wesley Dotson, Dr. Gordon Borland, and TDLR staff. Attendees on September 14 included Dr. Gordon Borland, Lori Snyder, and TDLR staff. The Standard of Care Work Group developed a draft set of proposed rules for providing behavior analyst services through telehealth. Licensed behavior analysts and assistant behavior analysts are currently able to provide telehealth services according to the policies of the certifying agency, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or BACB. The draft rules seek to clarify terms and requirements for providing telehealth services while not being more restricted than BACB's requirements. the standard of care work group recommends that the Behavior Analyst Advisory Board approve the draft rules as written for publication with any additional changes requested by the board at today's meeting. So, don't know if there's any particular discussion of that at this point. The rules will come up later under a different agenda item for consideration by the board. So that being the case, if we may then do the second work group report, the licensing work group. Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski was tagged to read that. Are you able to do that, or would you rather are you able to do it? So, okay. I'll read it. She's experiencing some technical difficulties. Behavior Analyst Advisory Board Licensing Work Group Report, September 29, 2020. The Behavior Analyst Advisory Board Licensing Work Group met on September 29, 2020 to discuss and review the Qualified Autism Services Provider Supervisor, or QASPS, certificate issued by the Qualified Applied Behavior Analyst Credentialing Board, or the QABA. Meeting attendees included Carol Sloan, Dr. Joyce Mock, Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski, Dr. Gordon Borland, and TDLR staff. QABA submitted a letter to the Behavior Analyst Advisory Board on January 28, 2020, which was read as public comment at the meeting at the January 29, 2020 Behavior Analyst Advisory Board meeting. The letter asked the advisory board to add QABA as an approved certifying entity for licensure as licensed assistant behavior analyst. Texas Occupations Code Chapter 506 defines certifying entity as the Nationally Accredited Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or BACB, or another entity that is accredited by the National Commission for Certifying Agencies, or the NCCA, or the American National Standards Institute, ANCI, typically called ANSI, to issue credentials in the professional practice of applied behavior analysis and approved by the department. Statute further defines a licensed assistant behavior analyst as a person who is certified by the certifying entity as a board certified behavior analyst, or board certified assistant behavior analyst, or BCABA, or who has an equivalent certification issued by the certifying entity and who meets the requirements specified by Section 506.254. Section 506.254 requirements for licensed assistant behavior analyst include meeting the educational requirements of the BCABA standard or an equivalent standard adopted by the certifying entity. The work group discussed several aspects of the QASPS certification, including education and scope of practice. The work group determined that QABA does not meet the statutory definition of a certified entity because the ANSI accreditation for the QASPS is for a qualified autism services practitioner, not an applied behavior analysis provider. Autism services is only one area in the full scope of applied behavior analysis services. Additionally, the education requirements for the QASPS certificate are not equivalent to those currently required by an assistant behavior analyst license. The Behavior Analyst Advisory Board Licensing Work Group does not recommend the QASPS credential issued by the QABA for an assistant behavior analyst license. So that is the recommendation of that work group to the board. We will, under another agenda item, we'll have discussion of that recommendation. So that those two work group reports having been provided, and thanks very much to the members of the work groups. In my experience, they dealt very professionally and thoughtfully in these decisions. Some of them are all of the issues addressed by the work groups, I think, are have very important ones and were dealt with in a very thoughtful, conscientious manner. I appreciate their taking the time to do that additional work and provide this report to the board. So next item on the agenda is discussion and possible recommendation on the proposed new rules and amendments to the existing rules at 16 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 121, Sections 121.10, 121.21, 121.22, 121.70, 121.75, and new 121.70 regarding the Behavior Analyst Program. I recognize Laura Pefferly, the Assistant General Counsel, who will present the proposed amendments to the rules.
Good morning, Board Chairman. And my name is Laura Pefferly, and I'm an Assistant General Counsel. And I will be presenting the rules for your vote in consideration of proposing these. If you do vote to propose them, they will be published with any changes that are made today. And they will go to a public comment period. And then you will meet again to discuss the comments and make any additional changes, and then make a recommendation to adopt or not to adopt. Today, you can make a recommendation to propose, or you can choose not to recommend to propose and send them back to the work group if you have any issues that you want to work on further that we can't accomplish in this meeting. So I have them on the screen if y'all can see them, and the changes are all highlighted. There are a few wording changes since you received, since these were discussed, and then I'll cover so that we can make those changes if you want to make them before it's actually published. And there are a number of editorial changes sprinkled throughout. I won't talk about those unless you have a particular question about that. And I also won't read everything to you to save some time. If you've had a chance to look through them, I doubt that you saw anything controversial in there because these rules really do just add a number of definitions for helpfulness. And then they pretty much put into rule what is already being practiced since behavior analysis has used telehealth for some time. It pretty much puts the minimums into the rule, which of course makes that enforceable, but it also kind of lays out the guidelines and the minimums. So I will walk through and I will cover mainly the changes that were made. And if you have any issues you want to discuss when we're on that language, then that would be the time to do that. I think just walking straight through is how we usually do it. So I'll go ahead that way unless there's any objection to that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So we start with the first definition. And I would note that not everyone in behavior analysis uses some of these definitions, but on the chance that there are certain factions that do, some of these are in here. You may never encounter that in your work, but you may. So they're in here. It doesn't do any harm for them to be in here. Asynchronous telehealth. This is when you're not in real time, basically. So we'll just go to the next one. That was just defining where the client is. The reference is in these rules to Chapter 111 of the Occupations Code, which does apply to behavior analysts because it covers telemedicine and telehealth. And so in telehealth, the definition of telehealth, you're in two physical locations. So that's really the primary condition that you're practicing telehealth, is that there are two physical locations. So here we're defining one of the locations, the client site. Direct observation is defined because this came up during COVID. We all had to check the statutes and rules to see what would be a conflict as far as people being able to practice using telehealth techniques. And in our statute for behavior analysts, there is this word direct, as in direct observation or direct supervision. And so we felt like we needed to define direct observation and supervision, and also clarify that that can be done through telehealth. It doesn't have to be in person. So that's why you'll see these definitions here. Facilitator, that's really not anything new, but they can participate in the telehealth. And we did define indirect supervision to distinguish that from direct supervision. This definition is kind of long, and you may not really like it a lot or be real happy with it, but it really isn't doing any harm. But if you want to talk about changing that, simplifying it, that's fine. The provider site, this is all having to do with the telehealth and how that's physically done. This one is just an editorial change for service agreement. And we defined supervision because that is not defined. So because we're defining direct and indirect, we felt like we should define supervision. Synchronous telehealth, when you are doing it in real time. Telecommunications. Some of these terms also appear in Chapter 111 regarding telehealth. So they're here. They are. I feel like they're just not controversial, but when we're having rules on this, they're there for helpfulness to see what we're really talking about later on in the actual substantive rules. So it's kind of laying this out. Katie was involved in doing some research and finding the information for these rules, for these definitions, and even the rules too. So these shouldn't be a surprise. And so that I've just shown you all the definitions that are added. And so if you want to talk about any of them before I move on, or if you want to address that afterward, that's fine. So,
Gordon Morley. Okay, Dr. Mock has a comment, please.
Hi, this is Dr. Joyce Mock, and I had a couple of questions. One is if we have any language in here about what are approved telecommunications platforms that will protect privacy in an adequate fashion for our patients, and then also if there's language about including telehealth communications or video files in the client's records.
The rules do have some requirements as far as the records. As far as recommending particular software programs, we tend to not do that. But the standards that apply to practicing behavior analysis are expected to be no less in the telehealth environment. So any protections of patient data or medical data have to be at least as strong as those when you practice face-to-face.
Laura?
Yes.
May I interject something? Occupations Code 111, which goes into definitions of telehealth, telemedicine for healthcare providers and physicians, does include in Texas Occupations Code 111 requirements for meeting HIPAA standards.
Thank you, Ms.
And that would apply to this.
Yeah, I think, I think everyone's aware that the Texas medical privacy laws apply, and HIPAA and that, you really, I guess I'd say the burden is on you to decide what software or precautions you need to use, but the thing would be to do diligence and make sure that you're using a protected program that does prevent hacking and that like I said, we can't really recommend by name software programs or but we do have an IT department. They may be able to help with questions on that. I think probably your best bet would be to ask professionals who are practicing telemedicine what they're using, because that would be even probably an even higher stringency than anything most businesses or occupations would use. It's also going to depend a lot on what equipment you're using. If you're using a computer system that's upgraded to the latest up to the minute antivirus and things like that, or if you're trying to do this with some rudimentary equipment, it's going to depend on what the client has and what they can install. So you may wish to use the best and brightest, newest thing out there, but whether your client can also do that, that'll be a consideration. So, and if we feel like we need to address that in more detail in the rules, we could possibly consider doing that either now or in the future. But we can walk through what we have, and then you could see if you feel like you want it to be more specific or detailed on that.
Yes, Dr. Mott.
I'm wondering if perhaps including a reference to the medical standards for transmission would be appropriate to include in our rules as well.
Dr. Mock, this is Katie Bryce. You'll see in number 27 that's on the screen for telehealth service, the definition, we do say that it's defined in Occupations Code Chapter 111, which is where that information is.
Thank you, Ms. Bryce. Dr. Mock, did that, any follow up to that? That's good. Okay. Thank you. Because I for myself, I know sometimes I think, okay, it would be for my convenience, I would like to see it spelled out here, but I understand that it's there and trying to keep the length of regulations manageable and avoid redundancy. I think the information is available there. There is, again, as I think Ms. Pepperly said, there's that telehealth does not reduce the burden for protection of the client in any way. In terms of data management, data retention, confidentiality, and as we know, there are a lot of complicating factors, including as at the client site, things that happen there, and there are within behavior analysis some good recommendations, kind of looking at some of those and some suggestions for solutions, such as the Texaba Public Policy Group workforce telehealth ABA task force has addressed some of those, but that's not policy, just a resource that some might want to see. Other questions or input from the board? And if you have something, I may not be able to see you raise your hand because of the limited number of photo stamp size pictures I can see. So don't be shy. Hearing or seeing nothing more, please continue, Ms. Pepperly.
All right. And as you mentioned, Texaba may actually be able to recommend types of software systems for that, but we try not to do that because we are trying to be independent and not favor any party over another on recommendations. In these licensing requirements for both the behavior analyst and the assistant, we added this one provision, and this is just really there to clarify that if you want to practice telehealth with a person who is in Texas, you need to have a Texas license. You can't be in Oklahoma and practicing across state lines without a Texas license if your client is in Texas. So that's just to lay it out very clearly in the rule. So that's added both times in those sections.
Gordon Borland, I just want to point out this is actually a very relevant issue that has arisen during the behavior analysis in the time of COVID. But there is this does not eliminate the exemption. Is that correct, Ms. Pefferly, that someone, if they be licensed as a behavior analyst in another state, can do some ABA services in Texas, but it's time limited?
Right, and that's why it says there, except as provided in subchapter B, it doesn't touch the exemptions that are there for, temporary, if the person's on vacation, things like that. So yeah, it doesn't affect those. It just, if you're seeing a client on a permanent basis by telehealth, you need to have the Texas license. So yeah.
Thank you for that, Claire, because I am aware that is a question that has arisen within the profession.
Right.
So thank you. If nothing else from the board, please continue.
Okay. This next part is where we start getting into more substantive requirements, and what we had, responsibilities of license holders in 12170. Well, adding all the telehealth would make that a really, really long section. So we just divided the administrative practice responsibilities from the professional practice responsibilities, which were the two halves of that section. We just divided them into two sections. So 12070 is just the administrative practice responsibilities, and the new section following it has the professional practice responsibilities. And both of these sections cover the non-telehealth and the telehealth responsibilities. So we're looking at two components in each section. So the regular responsibilities are still listed first, just some tweaks there for the shuffling the section here. And then that pretty much is the same on the requirements that are already there. And then we just patched in the telehealth down here. And that's specifically for the telehealth in its own section. And so this is just, this is the administrative portion. So this is not getting into actual treatment, but it's covering the basics of who, what, how, where, why, when, that sort of thing. And we are citing Chapter 111 of the Occupations Code again, and that's also going to be cited in the preamble in the Texas Register, and that is where telemedicine and telehealth is specifically addressed in the Occupations Code. Since it is not addressed in the behavior analysis statute, we felt like it's a good idea for people to be aware that it's out there in the law. And of course, Chapter 51 still applies, and the elements that are in there. So if you've had a chance to read it, this, as I had mentioned earlier, it just kind of lays out the basics that you can't have a lower standard of practice when you're doing telehealth. It needs to meet the minimums. That's also stated in Chapter 111 that telehealth cannot have a lower standard. We can't also make it stringent. We don't feel like this is any more stringent than anything anyone's been doing, but it just kind of lays out where the limits are. So here's some information about how that can be conducted. You can do it in real time, but it doesn't have to be, or it could be done real time and not real time at the same time. If you have stored information to transmit, say you're seeing a client, you want to send a video while you're seeing them that you already had stored, anything like that. It's really not restrictive. And you need to be competent with your technology. It's a good idea to practice that before you get on a client. But these are kind of common sense things that I'm sure anyone who's already practicing it is doing. But the one thing we've added here in 9 is that you don't want to be editing anything. When you store your video of a session, you don't want to edit out things you weren't real proud of that you might have said or something like that. So you need to retain the original documents, recordings, that sort of thing. So I don't think there's anything particularly remarkable there. And so unless anyone wants to discuss that, I'll go on to the professional services part of telehealth.
Any comment or questions from the board on this most recently presented section?
Okay.
Not seeing any indication. Please continue, Ms. Pefferly.
All right. So here's the other section we divided this up into, and this is the professional practice responsibilities, which mostly are the same. They just moved down into this new section, and then we patched in the telehealth. We do have a couple of changes here that not everyone has seen that I thought you might want to consider. We had a behavior analyst here where you see the blue. That said behavior analyst before, and then we thought, well, maybe it needs to be both licenses covered there. So we changed it to license holder. If you don't feel like it applies and it should just be behavior analyst there in the blue, then we can make that change before these go to proposal.
Ms. Gordon Borland, any comments on that or observations? Questions?
We weren't quite sure if a licensed assistant would have a service agreement or not. If they never would, then we can leave that as a behavior analyst there. But
this is Gordon Borland. Well, they would have to do it under the supervision of a behavior analyst. Assistant would. So ultimately, the behavior analyst would have to sign off on it to endorse it, whatever. It's under their, basically under their responsibility. There may be other thoughts on that, input? You think it muddies the water, clears the water, or just leaves the water alone?
and I'm not sure if there are any insurance companies that require the assistant to have their own treatment plan as part of the payment. I'm not sure. So that I'm leaving this up to you because I don't want to sway you either way. If it's accurate with license holder that we ought to just include them both, just in case, that's fine. And then also in C, we need to know if that should just say behavior analyst there, because that could say license there too.
Other in the Gordon Borland, other input, and again, just my recollection is and experience has been is that I don't think that I'm not aware of any insurance requirement that a licensed assistant have a separate treatment plan. And if they did, I think that would be an unnecessary proliferation of work and expense. But we may be hedging our bets by saying it that way. But input from anyone else? Hearing nothing, please, nothing more. Please continue. Next section, Ms. Pefferly.
Okay, should we make that third blue license holder, you think? Should it say license?
I'd like to ask a question.
Please, please.
You kind of asked the question, does it muddy the waters? And I sort of wonder that if this is suggesting that an assistant behavior analyst could do these things, I don't wonder if it's a little bit confusing to say license holder instead of behavior analyst.
Gordon, fair question. Other input or observations from the board?
Are assistant behavior analysts actually doing any of the billing directly to an insurance company, or where they would need to do these two things?
This is Gordon.
Oh, sorry, that's Carol.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if Ms. Woods is on the call right this minute. She might have more input than I. I'm causing strange sounds. Sorry. Kind of sounding like Darth Vader. Clearly, assistant behavior analyst services are billable, but by law, they have to be performed under the supervision of a behavior analyst. Whether the behavior analyst bills for their supervision is another issue. And I know that's a point of discussion sometimes. I don't know. I would certainly, just from my own observation under items A and B, license, if we replace behavior analyst with license holder, I don't know if that muddies the water or not. I agree with Ms. Sloan, as I would hate for anyone to read that and think that anyone other than the behavior analyst is the person who is actually authorized and entitled to make, to create, who is responsible for the treatment plan itself and for the service agreement. The issue isn't so much who types the language into the document, but overall who has authority over it and responsibility for it. And I think that all resides with the behavior analyst ultimately, per BACB requirements and our state law. But there may be others that have an observation or comment, thought regarding that. I will just tell you, I would be predisposed to say behavior analyst. I think that's less likely to, this Gordon Borland again, still babbling. Still, I think it maybe be a little less likely to inadvertently muddy the water. I think that if we said license holder, that wouldn't change the rules at all. The expectation is still there, but I'm afraid it might set the occasion for some people to think, oh, well, I'm a license holder. I'm a licensed assistant behavior analyst. I can cut loose on this and potentially act as though there were a discrepancy and they choose to go with the one more favorable to them. That's my thought. Other input from others?
And again, these will be going out to public comment, and not that we necessarily get a comment about this phrasing, but it could come up that assistants do some kind of a treatment plan that we weren't aware of. But mostly, I feel like they probably don't do the treatment plan themselves; that they're just part of what the behavior analyst is making. But that this could be changed if necessary later, but it doesn't seem to be too much of an issue.
Dr. Mock, I thought I saw you indicate a thumbs up on that you would agree in agreement. Is that correct?
Yeah, I like going back to the behavior analyst just to protect the integrity of that supervisory relationship. I think that's on further reflection, I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, thank you. Other input, and we still have then, if treatment plan item C, Ms. Pefferly called our attention to that. Would we want to leave that? A treatment plan is not required if a behavior analyst will not deliver treatment to an individual. Need we change that in any way? My own thinking is, if I were going to include license holder, that's probably the situation where I would place it. But other observations or comment on that?
This is Dr. Joyce Mock, and I agree with you on that, the license holder, because I'm concerned that the interpretation might be that the treatment plan is not required if the assistant behavior analyst is the one delivering the treatment. That it might be interpreted not the way it's intended.
Thank you, Dr. Other observations, comment on that?
The treatment plan is required if a license. If a license holder will not, then who would be delivering it?
This is Gordon Borland. Dr. Sokolowski, I can read your thoughts.
I know.
Or maybe I'm hearing you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Please feel free to raise your comment.
Okay, so I'm sorry, my phone got cut off because I was, my ear turned it off. So for C, a treatment plan is not required if a license holder will not deliver treatment to an individual. In other words, a behavior technician would be delivering the treatment. I mean, when would there not be a treatment plan? I was cut off during that discussion.
I think this was Dr. Dotson's contribution, and his concern was that if there was like a corporate client, you wouldn't need a treatment plan.
Oh, well, that's true.
Yeah,
That's true. If you expand it to, corporate world, yeah, and all the other sports, all that stuff. Okay.
yeah. Thank you, Dr.
All right.
Sokolowski.
Yeah.
That's I think that's a good recollection, Ms. Pfefferly, because we wanted to be clear that you don't have to have a treatment plan if you're doing OBM or organizational behavior management. You surely have to have some kind of a plan, some kind of a document, but not necessarily the service agreement.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or if you were doing perhaps it's classroom management, you might not. You might, but you might not. That would be covered in some other manner.
Should we rephrase this as a treatment plan is required if a license holder will deliver treatment to an individual? Just put it that way? Would it?
No, because in the OBM world, there may be individuals that you're working with to improve their ability to work in an organization, and that is an individual, but you don't need a treatment plan, not like the ones you do for a child where you're doing discrete trials. So.
Okay.
Okay. Other input.
License will not deliver treatment. Not required.
And then Dr. Mock, you had weighed in earlier. Didn't know if you had any observation on this particular nuance.
Yeah.
Okay. No. Okay. Okay. Other.
So this is
Go
Stephanie
ahead, please.
Sokolowski. So the issue is you're not delivering treatment. That's the issue. And C, you're not delivering treatment.
To an individual, yeah, it'd be a company or a, right.
I'm good.
Okay. Other commentary or observation questions from the board before we move forward on this? I appreciate that reflection.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. So it has been amended. Okay. All right. Ms. Pfefferly, please continue.
Okay. This next section here sounds a little scary, but really all that's about is that it was discussed that telehealth may not have studies conclusively showing that it's as effective or more effective than person-to-person, in-person contact for a treatment. And so it may not have that scientific basis firmly established yet. And so you would want to update your consent if you don't have that the client is willing to, be treated that way, even though you can't cite on a stack of studies that the telehealth is as good as, better than in-person treatment. And so that's what that's getting at,
Okay.
You pretty much, I think you'd want to update your consent to cover telehealth anyway, but in case the telehealth is not so established for a certain technique. So, and then we get into the question.
Excuse me, Dr. Gordon Borland, let me just clarify. That's, as I read that portion of the proposed rule, the implication is that, in fact, the provider discloses to the client that the treatment is perhaps transitional, experimental, or provisional. Do we have that covered elsewhere in the rules that a licensee would do that under any conditions, whether it involves telehealth or not? Because the BACB rules certainly would indicate that you make clear when a procedure is technically experimental or not established. Not established, exactly, Dr. Sokolowski. do we, so I'm raising, I guess, a broader question, Ms. Pefferly. I'm trying to remember if that we have in here language that specifically says that treatment, that a provider indicates to the client when, if the proposed treatment is experimental, transitional, or provisional.
Right, and that's what this the requirement here is. A license holder shall enter into a service agreement with the client, and then shall include in the service agreement or otherwise document and disclose to a client as appropriate. Client's consent to treatment that's transitional, experimental, or provisional, or for which effectiveness has not been established, or it hasn't been established for that method, manner, or mode of treatments. I think that covers, what your concern. That this is saying disclose and cover it in the treatment plan.
This is Gordon Borland. Yes, I think so. I hadn't reread ahead there to catch that, but
right.
I think that covers it.
Yeah.
That specific concern, at least with respect to telehealth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other?
And this is Stephanie Sokolowski. What it's also saying is that needs to be part of the consent.
Right.
At least the client's consent to treatment. So in my mind, we would need to include that in the consent, not just the treatment plan.
That Gordon Borland again. That's my reading also of on bottom of page. At least what's for me, bottom of page 7, section 121.71, capital A, under 2 capital A. Excuse me. Does include in the service agreement or otherwise document and disclose to the client as appropriate. So that's hits the consent and the treatment plan both for telehealth.
Yeah.
Good point. Any further discussion on that consideration before we move forward? Hearing none, please continue, Ms. Pefferly.
All right. So in professional services, saying that, repeating, which is in Chapter 111, also that the telehealth has to be at least as good as the minimum standards for practicing it. You need to make sure they're at least as good as what you would use in face-to-face contact, and that all other law that's applicable to your regular practice applies when you're in the telehealth environment. So this gets into that, and basically the conditions that you're practicing in using facilitators and that. So if you've had a chance to read it, again, this probably is not anything I pointed out here. You need to, again, it's here, you need to disclose that the procedure is experimental if you don't have the documentation that it's proven beyond a doubt. Kind of disclosing how you're going to do this, what you're going to do, what their choice is. If they didn't want to do asynchronous, if they only want it to be real time, something like that, you need to get the basics laid out with them as to how it's going to be done. And this again would go back to what you're putting in your service agreement and your treatment plan. Dealing with complaints, getting consent, updating the consent to include telehealth. None of this is probably a big surprise to anyone who's doing it, but if you started doing it and didn't get consent, you might want to go ahead and update the plan. you can't use just email or mail or faxes. I kind of doubt that a insurance company would pay for that either. If you're going to bill for telehealth, they probably want more than just those minimums, and that's not considered telehealth. Your first visit, it could be face-to-face or not. There are some things I believe in the medical world where the first visit has to be in person, but this is not requiring that. You still have to comply with whatever the certifying entity requires of you, of course. Being sensitive to cultural and linguistic variables, that can get into a lot of things that maybe need to be addressed, especially in some cultures. Eye contact is not a good thing. Whatever could affect the telehealth, you want to cover that and talk to the client, find out what is and is not acceptable to them. Supervision, you can do this through telehealth. It's perfectly fine. We wanted to make this real clear because of the COVID situation, that anything you can do in person, basically you can do with using telehealth. You're just going to need more disclosure and consent about this. So use a facilitator, and it lays out what the facilitator can do. And you may not be able to have the client and the facilitator on the screen always at the same time, but you need to be in continuous contact. I think that's probably part of a basic professional responsibility to make sure that there isn't something going on that you're not seeing. And here is one change we thought should probably add this to a client there in that sentence.
Okay. If the presence of
Any comments? This is Dr. Gordon Borland. Any questions or comments, observations to this portion so far? Still kind of mulling it over some, perhaps.
Stephanie Sokolowski, I've got a question about number 14, the one we just read. Does that include an interpreter? It's talking about a facilitator, because sometimes I may need an interpreter that may be a person who is qualified to do the work that I need, and that they understand conceptually what I need, but they're not certified, because it says a qualified facilitator. In my mind, they're qualified because I know my folks and I know conceptually what I'm doing. This person has already gone through extensive training, but isn't certified.
Well, couldn't it also be like a parent or a sibling that's doing the translating?
And in my mind, yes, if they're if they have a level of understanding that would do it.
This is Gordon Borland. I understand. I think we deliberately did not define qualified.
Yeah. Okay.
So as I understand, Dr. Sokolowski, that would not preclude your suggested way of dealing with it.
Okay.
And I think it's conceivable that a person could be technically qualified, but make the language, but may not be qualified interpreting computer analytics. Dr. Mott.
Yeah, I was interpreting this, and maybe if I'm incorrect, maybe we need another thing. But I mean, I'm thinking that there may be some circumstances where it's just not safe to do telehealth, for example, in a child with severe aggression or self-injury. where you as a behavior analyst have to make the call that you really need to have them in the office with protective equipment available or something like that. So anyway, that's how I was interpreting this later. And if that's not the case, then I also wonder if there needs to be something that, that the behavior analyst would have to make a judgment call as to whether or not it was safe to provide services via telehealth for certain patients.
Gordon Borland, yes, I understand the issue very much and would be in that position with some people. As I read it, however, I think that if the self-injurious behavior or aggression were so severe that just an RBT, for instance, or a parent, if the parent be the facilitator, cannot safely, not qualified, again, that's not qualified is not defined, that's up to the behavior analyst, because ultimately the behavior analyst is the responsible party here. So it's not just a translator issue, it could be sign language, it could be just in terms of qualified, in terms of having the skills and maybe even the physical ability. I think we both know people who have the client may have as a facilitator a family member who is much smaller than them and would not be qualified to provide some of the interventions, response blocking or whatever that might be necessary for, or using protective equipment that might be necessary in severe cases. As I read it, I think that it's broad enough that it covers that. But to your to an observation you made, Dr. Mock, I don't think that we specifically have, and Ms. Pefferly, correct me, I don't think that we have a statement or language that specifically says, and if it's dangerous to work with a person via telehealth, don't do it. I don't know that I was quickly trying to scan back through here, but I think that maybe falls under the just general instruction for behavior analytics services in general, Ms. Pefferly, that I think would perhaps be applicable, because the standards of this, there is no lower standard for telehealth services, as the document says. But I don't know, Ms. Pefferly, you might weigh in on that.
Well, I have on the screen that the facilitator can only, do what they're qualified to do here. If they have to have a license or a permit or something to do what they're doing, maybe restraining the person or something, they have to have some kind of qualification to be doing that. So that's a limitation on what they can do. And in 13, it's let's see. And I'm sorry, B, it's left to the discretion of the provider to decide whether a facilitator is qualified, because we did talk about how a lot of times the facilitator is a family member or someone like that, and so you kind of have to allow for that. So if a family member is used to dealing with the person, they may be more qualified than anyone to handle them in a telehealth situation, but it's up to the discretion and knowing the client for the provider to decide if it's safe to do it using telehealth. It may not be any safer than in person, because the person may still act up unexpectedly, but it's really gets into a judgment call, I think, on the part of the provider, and we didn't want to tie your hands too much.
Right.
I'd like to make another comment on that. Is Carol Sloan?
Yes, please.
I was just going to say, I like the idea that it's broad and that it's general, but that it calls to mind, you better think about this a little bit harder. Having lived with someone who's aggressive for many, many years, as a family member, you are stuck with dealing with them anyway. And I would like to think most behavior analysts would not propose a plan that's going to leave me in danger the rest of the time, even during the telehealth session especially, but we know there's carryover. I'm going to have to deal with that person later in the day. And if the environment's not up to it, we have no business implementing something like that unless they're in residential or in a clinic somewhere where everything's controlled. So I think you've got a nice statement there that makes people maybe think a little harder about who their helpers are in these situations. And yet I would hate to tie anybody's hands insisting someone, on the qualification. So it looks like a pretty nice statement.
This is Gordon Borland. Thank you. Dr. Kowalski, were you poised to comment?
Dr. Borland, this is Katie Bryce. We do have in different programs rules, we have a provision that says a provider shall consider relevant factors, including the client's behavioral, physical, and cognitive abilities in determining the appropriateness of providing services via telehealth. And so that might be a statement that we could include in these draft rules, just where it says that before you use telehealth, you need to consider if the client is a good candidate for it or not.
Thank you, Ms. Bryce. Comments on that? Board suggestion on that? If I'm hearing you correctly, Ms. Bryce, you're suggesting that it would maybe just further elucidate a little bit what Ms. Sloan was saying about think about it carefully. You're not prohibited; it's your call, but think about it carefully. I know that language such as that is known within the field, shall I say?
I just sent the language to Laura so that she could maybe insert it into these rules so you can read it and see it and consider it if you think it would be appropriate.
Okay. Other comments or questions or observations from the board?
This is Dr. Mock, and I like that addition. I think that gives some extra coverage or, yeah, good.
Thank you, Dr. Mock. Okay, so we see the language there, and it's just a matter of cleaning up details. But let me ask the board your notion about including that language as is.
This is Katie Bryce. Again, we would want to include the telepractice at the end because that's not a term that we use in this program. So that's one cleanup suggestion I have.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Bryce. Dr. Sokolowski, I saw the thumbs up. I take that to mean yes. As a very highly trained reader of human behavior, I think that means yes. Okay. Other comments?
Are there other factors maybe that you wanted to list besides behavioral, physical, and cognitive? Maybe, well, I guess aggression would be under behavioral.
Yes, yes. This is Gordon Borland. Physical would perhaps include the person's medical risk, their fragility perhaps, or their size. Like if someone was like, I'm blessed to be a big hulking ugly guy, so there's not a lot of people bigger than me. But if I were a much smaller, like many of my much smaller colleagues, it would be a different story. So I think physical involves multiple components. One is the person's actual physical status in terms of maybe health, fragility, otherwise, as well as their just size, stamina, perhaps. But other things we would argue. As a behavior analyst, I have to say I'm not real thrilled to see cognitive in there. But for statutory purposes, it might be okay. I am not sure I'm prepared at the moment to give you a really quick, clean synonym. We might talk about verbal abilities or whatever, but I think that what it's going at would be having where the person can, if you will, understand what's going on, perhaps can relate to the screen as reality, perhaps as opposed to a cartoon show.
Well, and the facilitator might be a family member who really understands what the person means, whereas if a facilitator is a stranger to them, they may not get those nuances, you know.
Right. This is Gordon Borland. Again, at this point, most of the telehealth ABA work is actually where the behavior analyst or licensed assistant behavior analyst is mostly in a supervisory or monitoring role and teaching and training role. At this point, most telehealth ABA work is not where the actual behavior change interaction occurs directly on the via screen or via audio and video between the client and the provider. Just as a point of clarification, of exposition there. Does anyone on the board have see anything else we would want to add, at least for first cut at this, or alternative to cognitive? If we go with it as it is, certainly during the public comment period, people can provide us feedback. That's certainly the case. Dr. Sokolowski, I think, has an observation. Can't hear you. I'm sorry. Perhaps, but perhaps we can reestablish contact and come back to that later.
Let's see what that is. So can you hear that?
Yes, that's great.
Interesting.
Okay, so please continue, Dr. Sokolowski.
But now, hold on. Because I think that's from my computer. Anyway, initially we were talking about a facilitator, not the provider of services, somebody else who was in the room with the person. A provider to me is, I'm a behavior analyst and I'm a provider. And this statement is about me being the provider, is it not? Now I can't hear you.
This is Katie Bryce. Can you hear me, Dr. Sokolowski? So yes, this is for the provider talking about what they need to consider before they even provide services through telehealth. If we scroll that down to the facilitator part, Laura, can you scroll down? I think you'll see here, like in this number 11 and 12, that the telehealth provider, before allowing a facilitator to assist a provider, shall ascertain their qualifications as appropriate and reasonable.
Okay.
I think that picks up what you're getting at.
It's Gordon Borland. Thank you, Dr. Sokolowski, for raising that, and Ms. Bryce for responding very cogently. I also just point out on page 2, going back to the definitions, provider specifies an individual who holds a provider. It's defined as an individual who holds a current renewable behavior analyst or assistant behavior analyst license under this chapter, or who is authorized to provide behavior analysis services. So I think that nails it to the behavior analyst and not the facilitator. I think that may have been part of the context of the question or comment.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. Other comment or questions from the board before we proceed? Hearing nothing else, Ms. Pefferly, please continue.
I think at this point we just need to decide whether to go ahead and include that to a client in blue there in that sentence. I don't really think it does any, should be controversial. It doesn't do any harm. It just is a little clearer.
This is Gordon Borland. I'm sorry, I wasn't watching the magic. Did you add to a client, or is the recommendation to?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't there, and we're suggesting that.
That's good.
Okay.
I'm seeing positive behavior here. Head nods, thumbs up. All right, sounds like we're good. Here, let's continue.
This little editorial change is just blue because we found it after I got a copy. I think, let's see, I think that may be the end of the substantive. Well, this is this yellow here is just a citation correction since the section numbering changed, and again another citation correction, and again and the editorial changes. So yeah, that's you've seen the substantive changes. It's like I said, it's divided now into two sections for administrative and professional responsibilities, and each one has the regular section and that special telehealth section in it. So that's how it's organized. And again, it's going to go public comment, so your whole universe of people will be able to look at it and comment. And of course, we look forward to that in case there is something we missed here. But we had pretty productive discussion and work group. So I think what we have here is good. It covers it in enough detail, but not too much to allow for flexibility. I think it's consistent with BACB. And so if your decision today is to recommend whether to propose as we've got it now with the changes. And then if you do recommend that, it'll go on to being published and the public comment period. And then the next time we'll meet, we'll have the comments and be able to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Pefferly. Appreciate your patience and working with us through that. It's a lot. And this is very substantive in terms of making some things explicit in terms of telehealth issues or telehealth services. If no one has any further general comments or observations regarding this proposed rule change, I would request a motion that we approve these recommended changes.
I will motion that Carol Sloan, I will motion that we approve these recommended changes.
Okay, Ms. Sloan moves that we recommend the changes. A second.
I'll second.
Dr. Sokolowski seconds. Thank you. So we have a motion before us to recommend approval of the amendments to the rule as reviewed here and as revised in the process of reviewing. Any further discussion? Seeing no indication of interest in further discussion, I call the vote. Ms. Luna, would you please poll the members of the board?
Yes, sir. Laurie Schneider,
I agree. Aye.
Dr. Joyce Mock,
Approve.
Carol Sloan,
Approve.
Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski,
Approve.
Ellen Cato Rhodes. I lost her. Amanda Nichols.
Approve.
And Dr. Gordon Borland.
I approve.
Motion passes.
Thank you to the members for working through this and to the staff for helping us work through this. Ms. Luna for taking the vote. Motion passes. So as I understand that the next step is that the proposed rule changes will be submitted and published in the Texas Register with the then open to public comment. Can someone from staff give us a hint about how quickly something might be expected to appear in the register and what the projected public length of public comment would be?
I believe it'll take about 2 to 3 weeks to be published. And once it's published, it's always 30 days for the comment period. And then a few weeks after that, the time to have the meeting, need to prepare the adoption paperwork and that. So, and then come back to me and decide whether to recommend, adoption. And if it's recommended, then of course it goes to the commission. So it's going to depend on a couple of main factors. One is the legislative session starting and where we could fit these things in. And the holidays probably won't make as much of a difference on this because it can go ahead and get published regardless of the holidays. But as far as everyone's scheduling, we'll need to schedule another board meeting after that 30-day comment period. So you're looking at least 60 days before you could possibly meet again to look at the comments, decide on adoption. And then it would depend on when the next commission meeting was set after that. And we don't have and of course, some of the uncertainties, what's going to be happening with COVID, but the commission is meeting virtually as well. So it shouldn't be a holdup. But the legislative sessions in January, so that can always affect things as well.
It's Gordon Borland. Thank you, Ms. Pefferly, for that kind of run through the timeline here. That's helpful because I'm quite sure I and others of the board will be asked, okay, so when does this happen? And the answer is the earliest would have to be after the first of the year if everything went with the shortest possible timeline. It sounds so. Just information. Okay, thank you. I think we've completed item H on the agenda. We have one more particularly substantive issue here. At this point, we've been meeting for 2.5 hours. I want to pose to the board, if you would, and to staff, would taking a break be helpful, or should we just force our way on through? Some of us really need to stand up. So what's the procedure if we take a break? We all stop video and mute and then come back in an agreed time, like 15 minutes or something like that? Or please.
Mary Winston, TDLR, Dr. Borland, you are the presiding officer and you would call the time to take the break, the length of the break, and when we would come back. And our folks in the background will put up a sign saying we're on break and we're good.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Winston. Gordon Borland again. Sense of the board, I thought I saw, yes, behavior, body language. I think we should take a break. Will 15 minutes suffice for everyone? Okay. Well, so we shall, the meeting will go into recess for, let's say 15 minutes. It is now 12:34 p.m. So we look to resume the meeting at 12:49, I think. Check my math. Okay. I believe that the meeting is in recess for now. So we mute our resuming. It's right now 12:51. I think we actually started talking at 12:50. So we're back to the meeting November the 4th, 2020 for the Behavior Analyst Advisory Board. We just heard from Ms. Pefferly mentioned that we need to perhaps look at amending the approved motion to recommend approval of the rules that about which we've been deliberating just before the break. So Ms. Pefferly, can you reiterate what language we might need to consider look at inserting into that motion?
Yes, you can basically make the same motion, but just add to it that you're all right. You're with recommending that any non-substantive changes that don't need to have board approval can be made if the governor's office recommends any of those changes in their review of the rules.
Okay, so anyone willing to, I guess, essentially move approval of the motion, previously approved motion, as just amended by Ms. Pefferly?
I will motion that we make that change, that we're that the rules that we approve, that they be moved forward if with any non-substantive changes that might be suggested by the governor's office.
Okay, thank you. And it sucks that.
I second that.
Okay, Ms. Nichols seconds that. Thank you. Any further discussion? Not call the question. I guess, Ms. Luna, I guess need you to do your very excellent roll calling again.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Laurie Snyder? Dr. Joyce Milk?
Approve.
Carol Saint?
Here.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski?
Approve.
Amanda Nichols?
I approve.
And Dr. Gordon Borland?
Vote aye, approve.
Okay, motion passes.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for helping us clean up that bit of language and procedure. I do want to point out that Ms. Winston had to leave the meeting. She had another commitment. And so Mr. Aris Mendes will be pinch hitting for her today, the rest of the meeting. So appreciate you being willing to take on that additional responsibility. The next item on our agenda is item, I lost my place, I. This is a discussion and possible recommendation regarding recognizing the Qualified Behavior Analyst Advisor Credentialing Board, the QABA, as a department-approved certifying entity and accepting the Qualified Autism Services Practitioner Supervisor, the QASPS certification for a behavior assistant, Texas Assistant Behavior Analyst licensure. So you've heard the report from the work group. So we want to open it for discussion regarding that recommendation. Again, it would be a recommendation to that the commission approve the QABA and accept the QASPS credential for a Texas Assistant Behavior Analyst. Or we can not recommend that go forward. Any comments or input on that question? Dr. Sokolowski?
So and I'm echoing. Are you hearing the echo? Okay, good. I'll ignore it. Based on the work group, the recommendation from the work group was to not recommend that request go forward. So do we need to discuss it?
Thank you, Dr. Sokolowski. Gordon Borland here. The proposal's been made in public comment in our January 29, 2020 meeting, so we need a respond to respond. As Dr. Sokolowski cogently noted, the work group suggested that it not be recognized as such, as per that the request not. Other Dr.
I'd like to make a motion that we do not recommend the this group for licensure.
The QABA and the QASPS certification behavior analyst, assistant behavior analyst. Am I understanding your motion correct?
Correct.
Okay, we have a motion presented to the board by Dr. Mock. Is there a second? Dr. Sokolowski seconds the motion. Further discussion? Seeing nothing setting the occasion for me to say that there's a desire for further discussion, call the question. Ms. Luna, will you poll the members, please?
Yes, sir. Laurie Schneider? Dr. Joyce Mock?
Approve the motion.
Carol Sloan?
Approve the motion.
Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski?
Approve the motion.
Amanda Nichols?
Approve the motion.
And Dr. Gordon Borland?
I approve the motion.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Luna. The motion has been formally made, seconded, and passed. So the recommendation of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Board is that the QABA Credentialing Board not be recognized as a department-approved certifying entity, and that the qualified a qualified autism services practitioner supervisor not be accepted for certificate or licensure as a Texas Assistant Behavior Analyst. So, that being the case, perhaps someone can advise if there is any further action that will happen other than, I presume, a notification to the QABA. I think that's a staff question.
Yes, they'll be notified in writing of the decision. I believe we'll be drafting a letter to them. Yes. Laura Pefferly, Assistant General Counsel.
Thank you, Laura. Is there, if Gordon Borland again, if they disagree or wish to pursue it further, what would be the next action on their part?
There's really not a formal process I'm aware of for challenging that decision, except that they could talk to the executive director and then proceed on to the legislature to ask them to modify the law to allow that type of licensure or create a new credential or deal with it however they see fit. The barrier to accepting that credential and that certifying entity is the statute itself. So it would have to be a statutory change to give what's being asked for.
Gordon Borland, thank you, Ms. Pefferly. That's useful information. I suspect that in our individual capacities, we might be asked. And so I want us to be able to give if asked in our individual capacities, be able to give an accurate answer. Of course, we always can refer them to you, to the department, I'm sure. And since Mary Winston's not here, she'd probably be a great person to contact, but I won't say that. Okay. So I think that we have addressed item I on the agenda adequately. Moving on to item J. This has to do with discussion, possible action to assign topics for considerations to work groups. I do note that we have had some changes in the work to the work groups. Some of our board members are no longer either in state or eligible to serve, and so we could replace them if there's someone who has an interest in adding and participating in one of the other work groups that you're not currently on, or if you'd like to not be on a work group, I guess, please let us know. Just to remind you, the work groups, there are 4 work groups. Enforcement, current members are Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski, Ellen Cato Rhodes, and Amanda Nichols. The second work group is the licensing work group, which reviews and makes recommendations regarding licensing requirements and decisions. Current members of that work group are Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski, Carol Stone, and Dr. Joyce Mock. The third work group is the Education and Examination group to review and make recommendations regarding education and examination, continuing education requirements and rules. The members of that group currently are Lori Schneider, Ellen Cato Rhodes, and Dr. Stephanie Sokolowski. The fourth and final work group is the Standard of Care work group, which reviews and makes recommendations regarding standard of care matters and rules, such as multiple relationships, treatment area, surroundings, and so on, scope of practice, documentation, authorized representatives of patients. The current members of that work group are Dr. Joyce Mock, Lori Schneider, and myself. So we have a total of 3 members of each work group. We look to up to 4. So at any rate, I leave that open. I'm not also need to so if you wish to perhaps be added to a different or another work group, please let that be known. Not necessarily right this moment if you don't want to. Yes. If you would like to and additionally, if there are any topics that we might that would be recommended for review by the work group. I don't know if there's anything there anyone has at the moment that which you're aware that we need to we need one of the work groups to address in preparation for consideration by the board. I'm not hearing any suggestions at the moment. Oh, someone's about to say something, I think.
Dr. Boarding, this is Mike Harris, Mendes, Deputy Executive Director. If the advisory board members do come across an agenda item that they would like to be placed on the agenda for the next meeting, of course, they can always submit that to Delia or they can submit it to Mary, and then we'll make sure we get that on there. There's a lot of information you covered today, but I'm not sure if everyone is brain fried or there's just nothing to discuss. So, but they can always submit that to us and we'll get that on there.
Thank you, Mr. Mendes. So in terms of in terms of work group topics, I'm not hearing anything new emerging, but that can emerge as Mr. Aaron Mendes mentions. Hearing nothing more. Item K is recommendation of agenda items. If there's things that, as Mr. Aaron Mendes says, that we want to be sure to cover next time. I mean, we know that, of course, the proposed rules and changes will need to be up for review, discussion after coming back from public comment, and so we can look at the response to the comment and then the board consider how it might wish to proceed based on those comments. What else do we need to add? Dr. Sokolowski.
We were talking about some of the data that we needed additional data on the report, the staff report to us.
Okay.
So, clarify that. I can't remember exactly what it was. Part of it was the breakdown about people, I remember the chart, the bar chart
Yeah.
We were curious about that.
Yeah. I think a couple of things is maybe one was the under customer service, the perhaps the total number of calls since there's changed how that those data are collected. If I'm tracking with you, Dr. Sokolowski. Then under enforcement, looking at the issue of total cases and basically before or pending or addressed during the fiscal year, during the reporting period.
And I would like to know the nature of the cases. We also talked about the ethics rules that were targeted.
Yeah, it's Gordon Borland. I agree. That was one of the comments. I believe Ms. Nichols had raised that also about which ethics codes. I think that's important. I endorse that perspective. Also, some question about maybe the trying to read my own notes here. The about pending cases, how long they've been pending, maybe some notion of range, perhaps a measure of average tendencies, whether it's the median or the mean, depending on which is appropriate given the distribution. But was did that incorporate what you were thinking, Dr. Sokolowski?
Yes, and I particularly like the idea of a range for the time frame for completing the cases instead of not a mean. Just, then we don't have any information.
Yeah. So Dr. Gordon Borland again, what I'm hearing is additionally to the time to close cases, average time to close cases would perhaps indicate the mean as well as a measure of central tendency.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I would agree with that. I don't see anyone disagreeing. I see perhaps agreement. Okay. So other issues that we would anticipate being on the next agenda. And again, as Mr. Mendes indicated, we can certainly recommend items at any time up to, let's see, there's a cutoff for things that have to be on the agenda. Is it 2 weeks in advance? I forget, 2 weeks.
Yes.
Once we determine when the next meeting once the next meeting time is determined. Okay. So keep those letters coming.
I have
yes,
I have
Ms.
one
Nichols.
thing. Yes, this is Amanda Nichols, and I just with regards to the enforcement, just the 25 or approximately 25 return mark at the beginning of the year, and just how smoothly that goes, and how we begin to open up those investigations that we stopped once COVID kind of hit. I think that's something else that we'd want to revisit at the next meeting. So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nichols. Mr. Mendes, yep, Ms. Nichols raises a question that hadn't occurred to me. Were there any, if there were any investigations that were put on hold due to the COVID access, we assume they will be, have been or will be reinitiated or recontinued. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. They were just simply put on a pause, but they followed once we began the inspections. Again, I'm sorry, Mike Mendes, Deputy Executive Director. I'm referring back to the executive staff report that I gave.
Yeah.
Ms. Nichols, yes, that was resumed the moment that we began back in June to start inspections and investigations.
Okay, thank you. All right, other items that we can anticipate we would want to have on the agenda. Will be the proposed regulations. That's really substantive. I would like to know any information that might be germane to the human trafficking requirement. If there's any issues that are difficulties that have arisen related to that, or problems or questions that have arisen. I am aware that within our profession of behavior analysis that some questions have arisen. And I think we had a at least some discussion in, I believe, the January meeting about continuing education credit. Does it have to qualify for behavior analyst? Does it have to qualify for BACB, continuing education credit, or is it a separate thing from that? And I think actually that's up to the CE provider, but the issue is it has to be addressed. I think that's a question that has begun to percolate up.
Dr. Borland, this
Yes.
is Katie Bryce. At the last meeting, this was assigned to the Education and Examination Work Group. And I believe someone from E&E did send an email out to work group members. They didn't get enough responses back to include that report in this advisory board meeting. So I believe that they will be trying to get together with those work group members again so that they'll have something to recommend at the next work group meeting, at the next advisory board meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Bryce. Okay, I was remembering we had some discussion. I didn't remember the detail that it was actually allocated to that work group, but good. We're further ahead than I thought. Pardon me. So, pardon me. Anticipate we'll be hearing from that work group, if at all possible. Okay. Other items. Pardon me. Pardon me. Hearing nothing more, our penultimate agenda item, L, is pardon me, discussion of time, date, location of the board, the next meeting of the board. I think that clearly, as we've discussed, we want to have it. We need to have the next meeting, pardon me, barring anything else emerging that's urgent, once we have the public comment back on the recommended rules change.
Dr. Borland, this is Mike Mendes with
Yes, sir.
with the Texas Department of Licensing Regulation. Yes, sir, you're correct. Once we're able to get comments and arrange the agenda, what will happen is that Daniel will reach out to each board member to get some possible dates for a meeting. And so, of course, the next possible time will probably we'll be in the middle of session, so we have to kind of. I'm going to ask the board to be a little flexible for that because we will be in the middle of session. But she will reach out to each and every one of you.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron Mendes. That seems like the best we can do at this time. Certainly, we will want to move as expeditiously as possible once we get that public comment and the staff have looked at the responses to that, taking into account the legislative session occurring. Pardon me. All right. Pardon me. I think I need to quit. Item M, the last is adjournment. Pardon me. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn this meeting.
Dr. Sokolowski, second.
This is Amanda, and I second to adjourn this meeting.
Okay. I don't know that we really need, do we need to vote to adjourn? No.
I guess the vote would be if they go out of the meeting.
Yeah. No one insisting that we continue meeting. The meeting is adjourned at 1:15 p.m. November the 4th, 2020. Thanks to all the members of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Board for your patient and wise participation, and to the staff for all your input and patience with us. So have a good day.